Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So today we'll be going through the business case of FIR. We are joined with Maria Coulter, and my name is Sarah Gouveia. I'm the Events and Marketing Officer for FIR. So before we begin, I'll just take you through a couple of housekeeping notes. So if you do have any technical issues, please do try to log off and rejoin us. You can also dial in using the details on the screen, including the participant pin if needs be. Do get your questions ready for us. We will be stopping and breaking after each section just to hear your thoughts and take any questions. The session will be recorded, will be available on the FIR Resource Library, the FIR Toolkit, within a couple of weeks. So I'll pass on to Maria, and she'll be able to introduce herself. Thanks, Maria.
Hi everybody, my name's Maria Coulter. It's a bit weird because obviously I can see there's people on the call, but I can't actually see what any of you look like. But I thought it might be helpful for you to see what I look like, so I'm not just a faceless person behind a webinar. Welcome to today's webinar. Just to give you a little bit of background about myself, you might pick up from the accent as we go along that I'm from the Northeast originally. I've worked very hard not to lose my accent along the way. I've been in the industry for over 30 years. So I started when I was 16 with a BTEC in building studies, and I went on to become a quantity surveyor and a project manager. And now I'm a coach and trainer in the industry. And I also, for supply chain school, I deliver introduction to fairness, inclusion, respect, and I deliver the FIR ambassador training as well. I've not done a webinar for supply chain school before, so this is the first one that I've done. Just to tell you a little bit more, I've got a voluntary position in the industry, so I'm a non-executive director for the Construction Industry Council, and I chair their diversity and inclusion panel. So I'm really passionate about this subject matter, and hopefully that'll come across in the webinar. So welcome everybody. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Supply Chain School, if you've done any of their courses before, but the FIR programme, it's an initiative within the Supply Chain School and it's funded by the CITB, and it provides free training for companies in the built environment. So you've got the FIR training that we provide here, and you've also got other training as well around sustainability, management, offsite manufacturing, lean construction, and BIM. And it's basically about making the supply chain school as sustainable as possible, building the most sustainable businesses that we can. And here are some of the partner organisations that pay some money every year to enable us to run the school. And they also lead the direction of the school as well and inform the delivery of the content. And you actually might be part of some of their supply chain. There's some big names on here that you might be working with right now. So that just gives you a little bit of background about the school if you're not familiar. And I'll be talking about the resources that are available later on as well. So today's session, what the hope is, if I've done my job correctly, is that you understand, first of all, the importance of SMEs and micro businesses to our industry. You understand what fairness, inclusion and respect means and why it matters, and also how this can positively impact on your business moving forward, and also know where to go for support to progress in your companies as well. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking questions after each segment as we go through. So if you want to put your questions in the comments section, they'll get fired through to me as well. And I'm also happy to answer questions as and when we go along. So if you've got a particular question on a slide that you want to ask in the moment, then I'm quite happy to do that as well. Sarah would have sent out an email yesterday which had some information about questions that we're going to be asking in the session. And that includes, what is fairness, inclusion, respect? What does it mean to you? Thinking about one thing that your organisation is doing well about that at the moment, and potentially two things that your organisation could be doing better. But we'll pick up these as we progress. So first of all, I just wanted to talk about the importance of SMEs and micro businesses in our business, in the industry, basically. These statistics, so there's roughly 340,000 SMEs, so that's 250 people or less, and these are some of the latest stats that we've got. So that means that there's over 70% are registered as micro businesses, so that's 10 people or less. So I'll be interested to know like how many of you are SMEs or how many of you are micro businesses. But that's 240,000 micro businesses in our industry. And also I just wanted to say that this important statistic is something that's been there's been a letter that's been issued this week to the Prime Minister by the Construction Leadership Council. They're talking about the impact of coronavirus on our industry and the importance of keeping construction sites open. But having seen a copy of the letter, which is in the public domain, it talks about the importance of micro businesses to the economy. So I just wanted to really sort of reiterate that point to sort of set the scene a little bit for this webinar. So now I've got a quiz for you. Here we go. So first of all, question, in 2017-18 in England, how many people started apprenticeships in construction management and all construction skills? So I'm just going to ask that question and get Sarah to collate the responses. This is where the silence bit kicks in.
I can see about 5 people have answered.
Yeah.
A little bit more time. If you could all answer the second question, Maria, if you'd like to go through that, that would be great.
Yeah, so the next question is, in 2017-18 in England, how many people completed apprenticeships in construction management and all construction skills?
So I'll give it just a little longer and then I'll publish the results for you all.
Okay.
Okay, 9 people have contributed their answers. I'll give it a little bit longer. Okay, let's go ahead and end the voting and I'll share the results.
Okay. So it looks about neck and neck then for 12,015, 19,450. So the correct answer is 19,450 started. So what have we got for completion? Okay, so most people have said 8,360. It was actually, we lost 12,050, so we lost over 7,000 people. The difference between starting and completion, which is a big number to lose. It's been published recently that there's a 600 billion pipeline for the construction industry over the next few years. And I think that equates to about 40,000 people a year that we need to join the industry, basically. So it's a bit of a worry when we've got apprentices who are actually starting work in the industry, but they're not completing their apprenticeships. So let's think about why that is. So reasons why people leave construction apprenticeships, and this is some data that was collated by the CITB. So what they've said is getting a better job is the most common and the single most important reason for leaving construction. The issue of better pay in other sectors is a recurring issue. Dissatisfaction with the work is another thing, but also the fact that construction didn't match their expectations. So they're saying about career development feeling too slow, lack of support from the training provider, too much travel from site to site or job to job, not feeling valued by their employer, and a lack of job security as well. So those were some of the reasons why people, like, apprentices were leaving, basically. And I'm not sure if any of you have had apprentices or had them leave. If you can identify with any of these, it would be interesting to find out. So the next question is, what is fairness, inclusion, and respect, and what does that mean to you? But also, before I go on to that and have a think about that, there's another point that I wanted to raise around apprentices. So it was the fact that as SMEs, you make up the majority of the industry. And I had a real light bulb moment a few years ago. I was attending a college. So I'm based in the East Midlands now, and I was attending a college, and it was a construction round table. And they were talking about how they were having trouble placing apprentices in the workplace. So this was a construction college specifically. And I think the thing that really occurred to me, and I had a bit of a light bulb moment, was it's really down to the SMEs and the micro businesses to employ the apprentices. So if you think about it, the big companies don't necessarily employ people to actually do the work the way they did years ago. They actually employ the supply chain to deliver the projects. So they're relying on the supply chain to actually employ the apprentices in the first place. So, I think that just sort of really reiterates the importance that SMEs play in recruitment and attracting the next generation into our industry. So I just wanted to make that point as well, just to give you something to think about. So moving on, what is fairness, inclusion, and respect? What does it mean to you? So I just wondered if we've got any responses to that or any comments so far. Have you had anything through, Sarah?
Nope, nothing at the moment.
Okay, that's fine. So I'll move on, and we'll talk about what fairness, inclusion, and respect actually means. And members,
Oh,
you can.
give me 1 second,
Yeah.
actually. I've got
Sorry,
a few points. Here we go.
Yep. So we've got creating a better place to work for all. It's about treating people equally, making sure everyone feels that they're a key part of the team. Creating the best place to work for everybody. Treating everyone the same. Equal opportunities in construction regardless of gender, race, or creed. Retaining the best talent. So we've got some really good responses coming through. Creating an inclusive environment so everyone feels welcomed in the industry. So we've got some really good responses through. So thank you for contributing so far. So thinking about what fairness, inclusion, and respect is, it's about the fact, first of all, I think that we're all different. So this is called the waterline of visibility. And the things that you see on the outside, so skin color, race, gender, age, but you've got all of the things underneath that a lot of people just don't see or don't know about. So physical ability, ethnicity, culture, religion, value systems. I mean, I think values are really important, thinking about what your own personal values are, learning styles, education, life experiences really influences sort of who you are as a person, sexual orientation, thinking style, family status, sexual identity, beliefs, work style, skills, talents, family status. We've got all of these things underneath that, a lot of people just don't know about because they only necessarily see what there is on the surface. I've got some more comments. So we've got about what it means: ensuring all employees are valued, not applying predetermined prejudices against people, treating people how that person wants and expects to be treated. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, I don't know how many people have heard of the term unconscious bias. There is a test that you can do to establish what your unconscious bias is, but it's about the fact that we tend to feel more comfortable and gravitate to people who are like ourselves. So I think in the past, that's how we've been in the position where people will employ people like themselves. So when they're recruiting, that they'll look for people who are similar, which is why you end up with sort of similar people and you have lack of diversity in teams. So yeah, definitely it's important to think about that. So we've got the waterline of visibility, thinking about what makes us different, and fairness, inclusion, and respect. So fairness is about impartial and just treatment or behaviour without favouritism or discrimination. And those are some of the words that have been coming through on the chat box as well. Also, full compliance with the Equality Act, and I'll touch on that in a little bit as well. So inclusion is about valuing and appreciating everybody's uniqueness, their diversity. And again, some of that's come through on the chat box. And supporting people to do the best job they can, because if people can be themselves, they'll do a better job, basically, if they feel accepted for who they are. And if they feel people sort of understand them, then it makes such a big difference. And inclusion is about creating a culture where diversity is welcome and everyone can be themselves. And respect is about treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their background or opinion. So there's some definitions around fairness, inclusion, and respect. Has anybody got any questions specifically so far on the first section that we've done? Yes, I understand these slides will be shared. Is that right, Sarah?
Yes, that's correct. They will be shared after this session.
Yeah, and also if you want to share this webinar with any of your colleagues in future, then it will be available. We're recording it, so it will be available in about 1 to 2 weeks as well, if there's anybody that you know that you think would benefit of this moving forwards. Got any other questions?
That's all for now, Maria.
Okay, brilliant. So we're moving on to why fairness, inclusion, and respect matters. We need to retain the good people that we've got. And if people can't be themselves, if their workplace culture is negative, if they're working long hours, if there's a lack of work-life balance, it's going to impact on their mental health. And these are some statistics. I don't know if you've seen the Construction News Mind Matters survey. So they did one, I think it was 2018, and then they did one again in 2019. So presumably they'll be doing one again this year. So it'll be interesting to see how the percentages change. But you can see some of the reasons that, some of the things that were contributing to mental health, including work culture, lack of, work-life balance, etc., long hours. And also, I think fear can really bring out the worst in each other, and it impacts on people's well-being as well. And if people are working in fear, if they're sort of operating in fear, and I know there's probably a lot of fear right now in the workplace given everything we're experiencing, then it does bring out, the worst behaviors in people, and that can really sort of impact on the well-being of people in your companies. So I think, when you think about retaining people, it's about sort of thinking about the impact on their mental well-being as well. I wanted to share with you a story of somebody. So this is Matthew. I interviewed Matthew recently for a podcast, and Matthew is a construction leaver. So I just wanted to share with you his experience. So when I interviewed him for the podcast, we talked about why he was attracted into the industry. So, on paper, he was the ideal candidate. He went to university, he did a degree in project management, he came into the industry, and he said, I was attracted by the problem solving, challenges, creativity, innovation, and travel opportunities that come with the industry. But what I didn't sign up for was the macho and oppressive environment I found myself in. Now, obviously, that's just based on his experience. But when we had the conversation, he felt that fear generated a lot of negative behavior, and he felt under pressure to act in a more forceful way when he was working on site, and that just didn't sit well with him at all. And I can kind of relate to that a little bit, because when I was a project manager, I was sort of leading design teams and sitting in meetings, and I was actually a project manager in the recession, which was a really tough time for everybody. And I just remember sort of feeling the pressure and feeling like I had to sort of almost like switch up my testosterone levels. I know that sounds a bit odd, but I did. Like, I felt like I had to sort of bang my fist on the table and be seen to sort of I wouldn't say be aggressive, but just be more kind of forceful. And that just didn't sit very well with me. I kind of felt like I had to be somebody that I wasn't. So I can totally relate to how Matthew felt. And I do know other women in the industry who have felt that way as well. But also, interestingly enough, I made that point a couple of weeks ago when I was doing an introduction to FIR. I made that point to one of the groups, and they actually, a couple of the men in that group said, well, we feel the same way. We felt the same way, because I always felt like I had to be 200 times better, etc. And always thinking ahead. And two of the people there said, well, we've actually felt the same way. So that was a real eye opener. And I think it just goes to show that, until we really get to know people and we have open and honest conversations, that you just really don't know what's going on behind the scenes. But what's interesting is Matthew's now come out of the industry. He's a coach, and he's now working with young people. He's mentoring them and coaching them around gender stereotyping. So his experience, he's now sort of working with young people, so he's really turned it around. So yeah, I'll if you have a look for the Construction Revolution podcast, you'll find the podcast on there. Also, thinking about why FIR matters. I don't know if you've ever heard of Stonewall. So Stonewall are a charity, and they're here to let all lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender people know that they're not alone. So that's their mission. And they empower the LGBT community to be themselves. And they also work with institutions to create inclusive and accepting cultures. And these are statistics from a recent report. So what they're saying is people perform up to 30% better when they can be themselves, but representation must exceed 15%. So when they can be themselves, it fosters positive attitudes and behaviours. You've got increased confidence and self-esteem. Supportive culture, more important than a non-discrimination policy. And energy not wasted on hiding who you are. And that kind of links to a recent event that I attended. So this week, Mental Health First Aid England have launched a campaign called My Whole Self. So it's about being able to take your whole self to work, basically. Now, what's ironic, and they've actually launched it this week when more people are sort of working at home. And I think one of the posters like shows somebody with like a briefcase and some bunny slippers. So I actually think that, there's probably quite a lot of bunny slippers and things sort of going around at the moment where people are sitting on conference calls, etc. But I would have a look at that campaign because there's things that you can do remotely. And it's not just about LGBT, it's about everybody being able to be themselves in the workplace. But one story that really sort of backs up these statistics. So there was someone who spoke at the event in London, and this was at the House of Lords, and they spoke about their journey of being gender fluid. So they're a director in a big sort of financial organization, and they talk about being gender fluid. So sometimes they present as male and sometimes they present as female. And they thought that the path that they wanted to go down that was right for them was to actually to become a woman, but realize that that wasn't the case, that for them to truly be themselves, it was about gender fluidity. And they have noticed that their productivity and their thinking and everything has actually gone through the roof since they've actually embraced who they are, and other people are embracing who they are as well. So that was a really powerful story that I wanted to share with you, and just sort of backs up some of the, the data that's coming out of the Stonewall charity. But also what's interesting, and I think this is definitely something that we've got to work more at as an industry, is Stonewall have got a top 100 companies list every year. And to date, there are no contractors from our industry on that list. So I think there's a lot of work that we need to do as an industry to improve that. So thinking about the business benefits that fairness, inclusion and respect brings. So first of all, innovation. When people feel included, they feel more comfortable to share their ideas. There's some data from Deloitte that identified an 83% uplift in innovation when people feel included and that their employer is committed to diversity. So we know that, as an industry moving forwards, we need to be looking at innovation, thinking outside the box, doing things differently. And if people feel that their employer is committed to diversity, it improves that innovation. With regards to safety, when people feel included, they feel able more to speak up about safety issues as well, to protect others. But also, if people are, feeling that they're included and they can be themselves, then, if they're not struggling from, sometimes mental health can impact on safety. If people's minds on where they need to be, if they're not focusing where they need to be, if they're, struggling at work, then that can impact on their safety and the safety of others around them as well. And Crossrail have made and researched the connection between safety and fairness, inclusion, respect. And we're waiting for them to publish that data. Also, from a regulatory and legal compliance perspective, failure to comply with workplace-related regulation and legislation, so we're talking about the Equality Act particularly, can be costly. So, for example, employees who believe their employers have treated them unlawfully, they can take the case to employment tribunals. And employment tribunals can obviously be costly for employers in terms of time and payouts as well, and outcomes. And also, that data is actually published online as well, so it could potentially impact on future opportunities if that sort of, if that's something that happens to an organization. With regards to collaboration, Deloitte research reports a 42% uplift in collaboration when people feel included and that their employer is committed to diversity. And with regards to engagement as well, similar data has found that employees feel twice as engaged in workplaces that are diverse and inclusive. And this contributes to increased productivity as well. We talk about in our industry challenges that we have around productivity. And I know that there's work happening, at high level to look at things like offsite manufacturing and all sorts of things like that. But I think the people agenda is the area that really needs to be focused on, because if people feel more engaged, if they feel included, then they're going to be more productive. And I just think that employers really sort of need to be focusing on that area. And obviously attracting talent as well. Young people are looking for diverse organisations to be part of. So it's really important to sort of get those messages across. I was talking a future build exhibition. I was part of a panel discussion, and I think the Construction Youth Trust were talking, and they were saying how they're looking, they organise a lot of engagement with young people, like getting young people onto building sites and getting them work experience. And there was a young Muslim girl who went for some work experience, and she went onto site and she saw a young Muslim woman working on site, and immediately she felt, okay, I can see myself working here. I can see myself working in a place like this because of the role models. So I think it's something that employers really need to take into consideration in the future when they're wanting to attract new talent. And also meeting client and customer expectations. So there's more and more focus from contractors. They're looking at how their suppliers are delivering fairness, inclusion, respect, and diversity and inclusion. So, focusing on this agenda is definitely going to bring you business benefits with regards to tenders. And I'll talk a little bit about this in just a sec. Another thing I wanted to touch on was, carrying on from the business benefits that that fairness, inclusion, respect brings. So McKinsey, they actually carry out a survey. So they did one in 2014 and they did one in 2017 as well. And their latest findings show that companies in the top quartile for gender diversity on their executive teams were 21% more likely to experience above average profitability. And with ethnic and cultural diversity, they were 33% more likely to outperform their competitors. So it actually impacts on your profit margins as well, focusing on this agenda. And I touched a little bit on this with regards to procurement. So this is something that's called the 5 capitals model. And this was taken from an ACE Future of Consultancy report, and they've actually put links, hyperlinks, so the ACE is the Association of Consultancy and Engineering, and the Construction Leadership Council produced a procuring for value report recently. So what they're actually looking at high level in the industry right now is using the 5 capitals model for procurement. And if you have a look at this, there's areas, so you've got social capital and you've got human capital as well. And human capital is, thinking about the productivity, the health and well-being, that includes diversity and inclusion as well. Social capital is about things like social value, how are you investing in the communities? And there's actually a case study coming up that I'll show you, or that's actually linked to these slides, which shows how a particular company have increased their diversity and inclusion by employing people, from the communities that they're working in. So I would definitely sort of have a look at this. And, more and more companies are actually looking at their supply chain to find out what they're doing around diversity and inclusion. So I did an introduction to FIR a couple of weeks ago, and this was with a subcontractor who's part of the Highways England supply chain. And they're specifically being asked to report every month on what they're doing around diversity and inclusion. And that's why they put a lot of people from their organisation through the introduction to FIR. And they've now got some ideas to look at how to actually progress this in the organisation and what sort of things it can be reporting on in the future. And the Construction Leadership Council are actually working on a model, so it's a digital model, that's going to be looking at scoring projects based on the 5 capitals. And that's something that's, being looked at the moment. So it might take a while to sort of filter through, but it's definitely going to be advantageous to be focusing on this agenda now for your sort of future workflow. Here's some examples of people who've actually, done some work and reporting on the difference that it's made. So J Murphy and Son have identified 72 million of new contracts and projects that they've won between 2017 and 2019 as a result of focusing their business on fairness, inclusion, and respect. And there's a couple more examples that you can see in the toolkit, which I'm going to show you in just a little bit. So we're talking about sort of what our sector needs to do moving forwards. And currently, you're probably aware and you've probably seen a lot of stuff, out in the construction press and, various conferences and things if you've attended. But, we are fishing from a very narrow pool of talent currently. So women make up 12% of the workforce, and that's out of 47% of UK working age adults. Black, Asian, minority ethnic is 5% of the workforce. And disability, so people with disabilities, 0.1%. Now, there could potentially be more people with disabilities who are working in the industry, but, a lot of people don't particularly like to declare, not all disabilities are visible. And they might not want to declare, for fear that it's going to impact on their job. We don't really have the data on LGBT. Quite a lot of people, they don't like to say. And there are people in hiding in the industry who are not sort of being honest about this as well. I mean, I know somebody who's really high up in an organization, and she is gay, and she came out to her line manager, didn't get handled particularly well, and she just felt that she needed to retreat back. And now, she doesn't really share, personal experiences. She talks about what we did at the weekend rather than her and her fiance. So there's a lot of people in hiding that aren't sort of sharing, who they really are. And if you think about the fact that we need 40,000 new recruits annually, which I touched on earlier, to deliver the pipeline of work that we've got in the future. So we definitely need to be casting the net wider and thinking about what we need to do. So we need to attract a workforce that's representative of the full diversity of UK talent, and attracting people that represent the communities that you're working in as well. And we need to accommodate differences as well in attitudes, in age, in agile working, LGBT, etc. So we need to be creating, these environments where people feel that they can be themselves. And we need to support the 17% of our workers who are age 55 plus, and enable them to transfer knowledge. I mean, we know that there are generational differences in the workplace, and I think it's important to bring the generations together. And there's things like there's mentoring, so you can get people to mentor other people in the organization, but there's also reverse mentoring as well, to get young people to reverse mentor the older people in organizations. So we definitely sort of need to be looking at how we can attract a workforce that represents the full diversity of the talent that we've got in the UK right now. Has anybody got any questions so far based on the slides that we've just covered, or does anybody want to share any experiences that they've had, or does anything particularly resonate with them? Yeah, somebody said important that organisations include FIR in their procurement processes, set expectations and then in their contract management, measuring outcomes. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'll touch on when we talk about what you can do moving forwards, I think starting to measure and have statistics of diversity in organizations is really important. I mean, I was on a panel in Future Build, and we were talking, well, I had to give a presentation basically which said, is diversity and inclusion improving in the construction industry? And the answer that I gave was that there's a lot of really good initiatives that are happening in organizations, but the challenge is that not everybody knows about them. So first of all, people don't know what other people are doing because we tend to operate in silos. And also, I do think that a lot of companies, they treat diversity and inclusion, like this agenda, is almost being like a USP. You know, they're not thinking about the fact that, you know, people could potentially help other people on the journey as well. So I think that's definitely something that needs to think about. But also, a lot of companies, they don't measure their progress. So they're not measuring like where they're starting from. They're not doing any surveys initially to find out like what the representation is in their companies. And then you could then look at how initiatives are actually improving that. Weights, I think, are really leading the way at the moment. So they've recently launched their statistics. They've set some goals and targets for 2025. So they've said what they want to achieve. They said where they're at now with diversity, and they've said where they want to be in 2025. So they've got specific goals and targets that they're aiming for. And I think those figures are sort of on their website as well. So if anybody's looking for ideas or information, then I would definitely have a look at that. And I think they've sort of outlined exactly how they're going to achieve it as well. Yeah, so I've got a comment. We already do a lot of things in our business, but it isn't all captured to prove the data. How do you suggest the data could be recorded? Well, first of all, I think first of all, if you've got a measure, you know, if you, I know that a company recently they've done a survey of their employees, to find out, you know, what the diversity mix is, you know, LGBT, people with disabilities, Black, Asian, minority, ethnic. You know, they've done a survey to sort of find out what the starting point is now, and then they're starting to put their sort of plan in place as to how they're going to improve that. So then they'll be measuring, you know, the data in the future to see if it's actually made any difference. So I would say, you know, I would ask, are you actually measuring that data in your organization at the moment? But also, one of the things I suggested to someone in the workshop I did a couple of weeks ago was just have a big brainstorming session and just get everything down that you're doing at the moment, just to start to capture that so that you've got that all in one place. Because, and I think it's good to do that as a group as well, because, you know, there'll be things that you potentially might not be aware of that's happening, that would be included in that as well. I've got another comment. Pressure to behave in a particular way. Language is very important and used in a very particular way in our industry. We are very slow to accept or acknowledge societal changes, often lead a struggle to understand or even to want to embrace change. That's very true. And I think that's why, you know, it's about sort of having conversations with people and understanding their point of view. So, you know, we're looking at the content at the moment, for some of the training that we deliver. And, you know, there's some great training out there around sort of leading inclusive teams. But I think quite often people don't really understand what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. They don't understand what it's like to feel like they're from a disadvantaged background or community. And I think we need to have more conversations to understand that, and understand, you know, for example, with LGBT, like things like pronouns and things like that can be hard to to grasp sometimes. And I think, you know, we definitely need more help and support in understanding these differences so that we can embrace them. How do we measure the maturity of an organisation from recognition of FIR to fully applying FIR? I think that is in measuring your progress in the data that you've got. So from a starting point of view, if you know where you're starting from, and if you think about what do you actually want to achieve. So, you know, if you're wanting to attract more Black, Asian, minority, ethnic into your organisation, if you want to attract more women into your organisation, like what is it that you want to do specifically, and like how do you know if it's working? I guess is if you are attracting those people. The next webinar that I'm going to be doing in May is going to give more information about how you actually, what tools and techniques you can use for improving diversity and inclusion in your organisations. And there are some really good tools on the FIR Toolkit as well. So hopefully that's answered some of your questions so far. And this is an interesting slide because I think you talked about we do a lot of things in our business, but it isn't all captured to prove the data. That's exactly what this slide is saying. So this is this was from the Federation of Small Businesses. They produced a report called Small Business, Big Heart. And they were just basically saying that, you know, a lot of SMEs are doing things to progress FIR, but they might not realise it. So 89% of small business employers offer all or some of their staff flexible working arrangements. Well, I mean, that's interesting times now because I think there's a lot of people are having to adapt to flexible working who'd never, you know, wasn't sort of certainly on their agenda for right now. 78% of small employers have at least one worker age over 50. Actually, there was an employer that I was at doing the intro to FIR a couple of weeks ago. I think they had someone who was 70. He was awesome and clearly was not ready to retire. 95% of all small employers have taken on at least one worker from a labour market disadvantaged group in the last 3 years. 41% of small business employers offer work experience and as part of the recruitment process or through their community outreach. And I know that there has been challenges or people have perceived barriers about getting young people to do work experience on construction sites. But I do know that the CITB are talking to considerate constructors and they're looking at how they can overcome those barriers to be able to offer more work experience on site. So that's something to look out for in future. So thinking about how do you get started with fairness, inclusion, and respect, and this gives you an idea about a structured approach to FIR by establishing a FIR or EDI policy. And the starting point of that is to put a policy in place. There's links to an equality policy here, so you can have a look at ACAS, an ACAS publication to find out what an equality policy would look like. It's obviously about making sure that you're compliant with the Equality Act 2010 and other legislation as well. But the Equality Act that legally protects people from discrimination in the workplace and in wider society, and protected characteristics include age, gender reassignment, being married or in a civil partnership, being pregnant or on maternity leave, disability, race including colour, nationality, ethnic or national origin, religion or belief, sex, and sexual orientation. I've just got a question in regarding my previous question. I was meaning in regards to our supply chain, are we to trust the data the supply chain provides, or is this audited for authenticity? Well, I guess that's a tough one. Are you asking for evidence? So if they're sort of saying that they're doing certain things, are you asking for evidence for people, you know, for your supply chain to let you know what they're doing. I mean, I'm not sure about this one, to be honest. I mean, I know that the company that I did the workshop for, you know, they were being very clear about what they were doing, and they were passing that information on a regular basis, and they were genuinely focusing on this agenda. So I guess there is, you know, do you trust the companies, but also what evidence are they saying? Like what evidence are they given to actually say that they're doing what they say they do in the first place? Would be I'm not sure how they're sort of evidencing that. If we want to apply FIR, then we should be challenging our supply chain to do the same. In my organisation, 80% of subcontract workers, absolutely. Yeah, you should be challenging them. And that's what this is all about. It's about getting them to look at this. And, you know, some supply chain some contractors are further down the journey than others. And I think it all depends on, you know, what they're like as a company. You know, there's some, it was interesting because this company that I did the workshop with, I think they were like a family business, though and how they employed people at the moment was basically, if a friend, because they were ground workers, if a friend of somebody wants to sort of work here, then we'll sort of, you know, they can come for an interview and get a job. And it's sometimes that's how the workforce develops in small businesses. So I think some small businesses are more mature than others on their diversity and inclusion journey. So, and I think by actually asking them for this data, for, you know, contractors asking them for this information, is going to put more of an incentive on them to actually do it. So I would say definitely challenge them. And, you know, because you're relying on them, you're being asked by clients to fulfill certain criteria to win work. You know, you your supply chain are the ones that are actually delivering the work, so they're the ones that really need to be feeding into this process as well. So just moving on, or carrying on with the organizational basics, and some of you, if you obviously work for big organizations, you'll have all of this in place. So it's about having the policy in place, but also think about the process of actually implementing it. So are you going to put together an action plan to actually do that? You know, what are your objectives? What targets do you want to achieve? So you're thinking about what targets you want to achieve, what activities are going to be undertaken, who's going to do that, how is it going to be measured? And I'd also say that, you know, this has really got to come from the leaders of an organization. You know, they've really got to be behind this agenda. They've got to be thinking about this as a business strategy. It's not just a, you know, an HR strategy. This is a business strategy to look at this. So I think it's really important to take that into consideration. And making sure that you've got the governance in place. So saying about the leadership, linking to business planning, linked to human resource activity. And this gives you some ideas. So think about how you're advertising job vacancies, managing biases in recruitment. And there's some really good resources on the FIR Toolkit to help you to do that. Ensure that you've got a fair and transparent human resource cycle. Monitor diversity in your organisation. Flexible and agile working. Well, there's a lot of flexible agile working happening at the moment, but also before that, I know that, you know, there's some of the big companies in the industry have been looking at flexible and agile working on site, which is really encouraging. Think about how you're inducting people into your organisation. There's some really good toolbox talks, and on the FIR Toolkit, and also, you know, there's like 1 hour sort of webinars to sort of introduce them to the topic area as well. and think about training everybody so that everybody sort of understands what it's all about. Grievance and whistleblowing processes. It's really important that people feel that they can say something, that they can speak up, that they're going to be heard. Survey employees, which is something I was just talking about, and promote inclusive workplace culture, language, and behaviours as well. So these are some of the activities that you can look at. And examples of how companies have progressed FIR. So if you have a look on the toolkit, you'll find these case studies talking about how it's improved their, their businesses, their profit margins. There's a video here about Ardmore, how they've recruited and retained a diverse workforce. And that's about how they've recruited from the communities that they're building in as well. So that's a really good case study for you to have a look at. And I've just got a couple of questions that I just want to address as well. So my maturity question is asking, if we challenge the supply chain, how can we authenticate the data they provide to bring them on the journey with us? Or is there's just trust at the minute? That's a difficult one, I guess. I would be asking, like, there is that element of trust, about trusting your supply chain, but asking them what improvement it's made. Like, what have they got, any anecdotes, any stories that they can share that's actually shown how this has impacted positively on their business, on their people, on their productivity. I know it's, it is hard to authenticate that data, but I would be saying, what stories can they tell? What improvements have happened, basically? And I think you can tell when there's a culture change as well. If something's changed as a result of taking action. Tier ones provide diversity data to clients at the moment, but they trust us and don't audit, as far as I know. Okay, so yeah, so that's a response. So thinking about one thing your organisation does well around EDI. Has anybody got any responses? This was one of the questions that we asked. I'm just conscious of time at the moment as well. Have we got any responses, Sarah?
None for the moment.
Okay. Feel free to comment as we go if you want to put in sort of what your comments are, what you're doing, because that'll get picked up on this webinar and people will be able to see those comments as well. So just to introduce you to the FIR Toolkit. So there's a link here that you can go and have a look at, and it's CPD accredited as well. And there are some great modules that you can do. So there's achieving business success through FIR and FIR on site, why it matters and how to achieve it. You've got leading people inclusively. That's a really good one, and that includes looking at unconscious bias as well. They've also got setting up an inclusive site and site office. There's the FIR induction, so that covers the basic requirements of the Equality Act in a 2-minute film. You've also got mental health and wellbeing films, trainer scripts, resource sheets. So there's some great, the toolbox talks are really good. They're only sort of a couple of minutes long, but they're really impactful. So I would definitely have a look at those. There's a great resource library as well. So there's case studies, there's masterclasses, there's webinars. So there's ones that have already been recorded and have already happened are on there as well. So you can access those. You've got future webinars that are coming up as well. You can follow us on Twitter and find out what we're doing in different organisations. So if you haven't already had a look at the FIR Toolkit, then I would definitely have a look at that. And finally, it's about thinking about what action you're going to take. So, I've done this introduction to FIR, why it matters, and why it's important for SMEs. So I would really like you to think about, what you're going to do to progress it, and who's responsible, what resources do you need, but most importantly, what does success look like? So where do you actually want to get to with this? So, definitely make some space to fill this out after the webinar, because action is obviously the most important thing. And hopefully by the end of this session, which we're coming to the end now, you now understand the importance of SMEs and micro businesses to our industry. You understand what FIR means. You understand why it matters, and also how this will positively impact on your business. And we've given you some links to actually go and start to progress your FIR journey. And before I finish, I just wanted to pick up a couple of points about what people are doing in their organisation. So somebody said flexible working. We have a religious holidays policy whereby people can swap their Christian holidays for those of their own religion. Been really appreciated. That's brilliant. My organisation are currently enrolled on a programme called Moving On Up, which is a gender diversity programme that supports women in the construction industry. Brilliant. I've made a note of that one. So thank you for sharing. And have a think about what's the one thing you're going to do as a result of today's workshop. What light bulb moments have you had? And just wondered if you've got any questions. I'm conscious that we've run over by a couple of minutes, so my apologies for that, but hopefully you found it useful, and hopefully I've tried to answer as many questions as I can as we've gone along. So has anybody got any other questions that they want to raise?
I'll let people type in their questions. But I just wanted to remind you all that we do have another session lined up, another webinar on Monday taking place with a couple of people from Balfour Beatty. So it's around setting up an impactful staff network, part 2. We did one late last year, which was really good and really well received. So we're doing a second part to that. So that's online on our events schedule. If you'd like to book onto that, it's not too late. You will hear from Tech Tan, who's the Assistant Supply Chain Manager, and Amanda McKay, Quality Director. So if there is no more questions, I think that is a wrap. And thank you so much, Maria. That was really thought-provoking, and I hope you all go away and take action, as Maria's kindly pointed towards some of our tools and techniques in order to do that. So thanks so much, Maria. Is there anything else you'd like to say before you go?
No, that's great. Thank you everybody for being on the webinar today, and hope you found it useful.
Lovely, thanks so much. Just a quick note, there is a feedback form once we end this session. So if you could please complete that, it takes a couple of minutes. That would be really useful, just so we can pick up on any of your thoughts. Thanks so much, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you. Actually, I'll just say one more thing. If on the comments bit on the feedback form, if there's anything specific that you want help and support with, then that's something that we can take into consideration for the next webinar.
Yes, absolutely. So I will share the feedback with you, Maria, and we can pick that up. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye now.